Greetings from our channel again. Johnny Mathis remains silent about his opponent's attempts to harm him for decades. Despite selling 360 million recordings, the music veteran known as Too Soft has come to terms with the fact that he is 89 years old. The nasty moniker Frank Sinatra gave him, the addiction that nearly put an end to it all, and the racist threats that had him dodge gunfire on stage. We're revealing today who actually made an effort to stifle the voice. On September 30, 1935, Johnny Mathis was born in Gilmer, Texas. He came from a musical family and was the fourth of 7 children. Had previously performed on stage as a singer and pianist in vaudeville. Johnny was impacted for a long time by this musical backdrop. Johnny's father saved up $25 when he was 8 years old to purchase an upright piano, which at the time was a substantial expenditure. Clem disassembled the piano overnight and reassembled it inside their tiny San Francisco apartment since it was too big to fit through the front entrance. His commitment demonstrated his strong belief in his son's abilities. Johnny's family relocated to the Fillmore neighborhood of San Francisco shortly after his birth. Known as the Harlem of the West, the area was teeming with culture and music. His love of singing was influenced by his upbringing in that setting. He began playing at church, school functions, and family get-togethers when he was 8 years old. He learned how to sing My Blue Heaven from his father, who also served as his first instructor. When he was still a child, his parents formed a little fan club for him because they thought he was so great. Johnny began taking official voice lessons from renowned Bay Area vocal teacher Connie Cox when he was 13 years old. Johnny helped around the house in exchange for instruction because the family couldn't afford traditional tuition. He spent 6 years learning everything from classical techniques to vocal scales, which helped him develop his smooth tenor voice. His destiny as one of the most renowned vocalists in America was made possible by those years of preparation. Johnny loved to play music, but he was also a great athlete. He excelled in track and field and basketball at George Washington High School. He established a high jump record of 6 feet 5.5 inches while attending San Francisco State University on an athletic scholarship, falling just 2 inches short of the then current Olympic mark. He was regarded by many as one of the Bay Area's top all-around athletes. Johnny began playing in local nightclubs while he was a college student. A life-altering event occurred at the Black Hawk one Sunday during a jam session. Noga, Helen. When the club's co-owner heard him sing, his voice drew her in right away. She became his manager after realizing his potential. She made arrangements for George Avakian, an official at Columbia Records, to see Johnny perform at Andy's 440 Club in 1955. Avakian was so pleased that he sent Columbia a telegram stating that he had discovered a remarkable 19-year-old boy who had the potential to succeed. Forward blank contracts. Johnny, who was only 19 at the time, signed his first recording contract with Columbia Records later that year. In 1956, he released his debut album, Johnny Mathis, which introduced a new tone in popular music. Gil Evans and Teo Macaro's jazz-inspired arrangements for the record emphasized Mathis's sultry vocals. However, at the time, jazz records were not selling well. And the album's sales were poor. Despite having songs like Easy to Love and Prelude to a Kiss, it was never listed among the top 15 pop albums sold by Billboard at the time. Columbia realized they needed a new strategy since the album didn't have any impact. It turned out to be a pivotal occasion. Mathis shifted away from jazz and toward romantic pop ballads under the direction of Mitch Miller, a significant figure at Columbia Records. Despite its lack of success, his debut album demonstrated that he had something unique. He stood out for his warmth, command, and emotional depth in his voice. Miller regained all creative control in late 1956 and changed Mathis's name to a balladeer. Mathis recorded 2 tracks that would transform his career during a recording session that fall. It's Not For Me To Say, but It's Fantastic. Wonderful, Wonderful, and It's Not For Me To Say both reached number 14 and number 5 on the Billboard charts, respectively, when they were published in early 1957. Mathis stood out in both songs thanks to his smooth tenor and sumptuous orchestral arrangements. At a period when rock and roll was becoming popular. Chances Are followed. This beautiful ballad, which was released in the middle of 1957, is still one of Mathis's most cherished songs and his first number 1 hit. It was written by Robert Allen and Al Stillman and encapsulated his capacity to convey intense feeling through nuanced vocalizations. His 3 top 10 hits by the end of 1957 demonstrated that Miller's foresight had been successful. Despite the success of rock musicians like Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley, his distinctive sound became romantic ballads that appealed to admirers of all ages. When Mathis appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show on June 16, 1957, it was a significant breakthrough. He became a national fame suddenly at the age of 21 after performing in front of millions of people. At the time, the show was one of the largest platforms available to performers, and being on it guaranteed immediate fame. Mathis played a few of his recent songs, such as Wonderful and It's Not For Me to Say. His records shot to the top of the charts as a result of the publicity. Chances Are quickly become a huge popular song, attaining the top spot and establishing his reputation in American pop music. Mathis' smooth vocals and polished stage presence won him accolades from critics. His subtle elegance appealed to viewers seeking something more timeless and romantic than the exuberant displays of rock musicians. His songs felt cinematic because of his fluid delivery and expansive orchestral arrangements. When MGM Studios asked him to perform It's Not For Me to Say for the 1957 picture Lizzie, that link to the movie quickly became genuine. He later contributed a certain smile to the soundtrack of another movie, broadening his influence outside of the music business. With Johnny's Greatest Hits, released in 1958, Johnny Mathis altered the course of music history. It was the first CD ever promoted as a greatest hits compilation, therefore it was more than just a collection of songs. Previously, record labels did not release albums in this manner, but Mitch Miller of Columbia Records had a daring notion. Miller collected his greatest hits, such as Chances Are, Wonderful, and It's Not For Me to Say, while Mathis was on tour and unable to create new music. The outcome was a groundbreaking album that topped the Billboard best-selling pop LPs list for 490 weeks. Almost 10 years. That record was retained until Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon surpassed it in 1983. In addition to making history, the album's popularity established a new standard. Other performers soon followed, such as the Eagles with their best hits from 1971 to 1975 and Elvis Presley with his golden albums. The industry adopted the concept of a greatest hits album, demonstrating the impact of Mathis's collection. By 1999, it had sold over 1 million copies, demonstrating his enduring popularity. The album Merry Christmas, which Mathis published later that year, went on to become a holiday classic. Percy Faith's magnificent orchestral arrangements and his warm, silky vocals make it one of the most cherished Christmas records ever. Winter Wonderland, White Christmas, and Silent Night became seasonal favorites. After a successful initial run, the record made a comeback to the Billboard charts each holiday season for years. It achieved multi-platinum status in 2013 after selling more than 5 million copies. Mathis became the voice of Christmas itself, not just a recorder of holiday tunes. His legacy endures today as his renditions of Sleigh Ride and Silver Bells reverberate throughout the airways every December. It's Not For Me to Say stands out as an early breakout among his Hallmark singles. The song, which was featured in the 1957 movie Lizzie, became a romantic favorite and peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Top 100. Films like Goodfellas and Zodiac gave it fresh life decades later, bringing Mathis music to a newer audience. The song that would define his career, Misty, followed. Jazz pianist Errol Garner originally composed it as an instrumental, but Mathis's 1959 recording of a vocal version elevated it to a new level. The song, which featured a passionate performance and lyrics by Johnny Burke, peaked at number 12 on the US pop singles list. It wasn't merely a hit. It turned into a classic. Garner personally approved of Mathis' interpretation by attending the recording session. The distinctive fade-in technique in which Mathis approached the microphone while singing gave the song a depth of emotion that left a lasting impression. Later, both Mathis and Garner's renditions were admitted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, solidifying Misty's status as one of the all-time great songs. Racial obstacles were prevalent throughout the time that Johnny Mathis developed his career, particularly in the music industry. In the 1950s, he experienced discrimination as a black vocalist that went much beyond harsh treatment. It endangered his life. Before a show in the South, he received a horrifying warning that if he went on stage, someone would shoot him. Mathis continued the show without giving up. He made himself a more difficult target by roaming around the stage while performing his hit song, Chances Are. Black artists, including ones as accomplished as him, had to deal with this terrifying reality. In addition to the direct risks, Mathis had to contend with segregation in almost every facet of touring. He was frequently prohibited from staying in the same hotels as his white bandmates or fans. This was particularly prevalent in regions known for their rigid racial segregation, such as the South and Las Vegas. Even after performing at large venues in Vegas, he was compelled to remain on the west side of the city, the space reserved for black residents and performers. Black entertainers were treated like second-class citizens regardless of how much money they brought to the casinos. Mathis once compared these sensations to watching a depressing film. Even though he saw the injustice, he was unable to make a quick change. Nevertheless, his popularity and that of other black musicians, such as Sammy Davis Jr., helped to advance the cause. By 1960, hotel owners were compelled to re-evaluate their practices due to their existence and the financial influence they carried. One spectacular demonstration did not lead to desegregation on the Las Vegas Strip. People like Mathis, who just showed up, performed, and refused to be ignored, were responsible for the gradual change. Although the bigotry Mathis experienced influenced his views on equality, he refused to allow it to define him. He was up in a more varied atmosphere in San Francisco and wasn't completely exposed to systemic prejudice until he began touring. His parents advised him to keep his attention on his objectives and not concentrate on injustice, so he did just that instead of reacting angrily. He made the decision to resist in his own way by carrying on with his performance and not letting threats deter him. And by demonstrating that segregation could not limit talent. There was more to Johnny Mathis' 1964 breakup with his longtime managers, Helen and John Noga, than just business. His career changed as a result of this chaotic, emotionally charged turning moment, which also made him take charge of his own destiny. At one point, the Nogas were like family to Mathis, having found him and helped him start his career. But fissures began to appear by the early 1960s. Mathis's ascent to prominence had been propelled by Helen Noga. She helped him land successes like Chances Are in Misty, landed his first major contract with Columbia Records, and even sold her jazz club, the Black Hawk, so she and her husband could devote all of their attention to managing him. The fact that Mathis briefly lived with the Nogas demonstrated how closely their personal and professional lives were entwined. But there were challenges along the way. Even though he was one of the highest-paid entertainers of the time, Mathis became aware that his earnings weren't increasing as quickly as they ought to have. According to reports, his net worth climbed by less than $25,000 between January 1961 and June 1964. This was concerning. Mathis suspected high commissions, needless spending, and poor management. When he sued the Nogas in October 1964 to try to have his contract revoked, tensions reached a breaking point. Helen Noga refused to give up. She filed a countersuit, claiming that she was responsible for Mathis' success. The legal dispute grew acrimonious in public, destroying what had been a solid collaboration for good. Money wasn't the only reason for the split. Mathis desired command. On September 30, 1964, his 29th birthday, he took a risk by establishing Rojan Productions, a business that would manage his appearances on television, concerts, and promotional activities. He started John Matt Records 3 years later in order to create his own songs. In the 1960s, when record labels and managers dominated the industry, this was an uncommon move for an artist. However, Mathis was adamant about creating something that was genuinely his. Mathis gained stability with Ray Hahn's new administration. Mathis assumed complete control of his business interests after Hahn stayed by his side till his death in 1984. But it had been hard being apart from the Nogas. He was emotionally and physically exhausted from the strain of the lawsuit and an unrelenting traveling schedule. He battled and eventually conquered his addiction to sleeping drugs. Mathis demonstrated his adaptability despite rock and roll's explosive rise in popularity, which saw artists like the Beatles dominate the charts. He adjusted rather than faded into the background. His ability to adapt to the shifting music market was demonstrated by albums such as Olé, 1965, which had songs in Portuguese and Spanish. Behind the scenes, Johnny Mathis struggled with personal issues that almost ended his career, despite his smooth voice and timeless hits. He first encountered Dr. Max Jacobson, a doctor known for giving so-called vitamin shots to celebrities, in the early 1960s, which sparked his battle with addiction. Amphetamines were laced into these injections. They appeared to be a miracle at first. After suffering from laryngitis, Mathis's voice returned all of a sudden. At places like the Copacabana in New York, he might play night after night, sometimes 5 shows in one evening. However, there was a price for the energy boost. His health suffered as a result of the medicines, and he became dependent before he realized it. Another issue was alcohol. The beverage of his choice was champagne. It appeared innocuous at first, a way to recognize achievement. But as time went on, it became evident that his life was being taken over by the combination of prescription medicines and booze. He came to the realization that these behaviors weren't merely diversions by the 1980s. Everything he had constructed was under danger from them. He was aware that he needed to change. Thanks to a friend who also happened to be First Lady Nancy Reagan, things took a significant turn. She didn't think twice about speaking up when she saw him drinking at a reception. He was admitted to the Havre de Grace Rehabilitation Center in Maryland after she indicated he had a problem. Run by Jesuit priests, the clinic offered more than just detoxification services. They assisted Mathis in comprehending the reasons behind his drug use. And first of all, alcohol. The encounter changed my life. He would later refer to it as the best thing that had ever occurred to him. Reagan did more than just act as a favor. Through her Just Say No campaign, she was actively involved in anti-drug initiatives, and her support demonstrated the effectiveness of interpersonal relationships in the battle against addiction. However, professional assistance was not the only factor in recovery. To get through it, Mathis turned to his family and his faith. His parents had instilled resilience in him while he was growing up in San Francisco, and those teachings have since proven to be vital. When he most needed them, his family was there for him, providing love and compassion instead of condemnation. Mathis maintained his love of music throughout it all. He continued to record and perform even during his darkest hours, producing some of his era's most enduring songs. His position as one of the best-selling musicians of all time has been solidified by hits like Misty and Chances. He returned to the stage with a fresh sense of purpose and clarity after sobriety. Johnny Mathis had no intention of being well known for anything other than his music, but in 1982, a casual remark altered the course of events. He casually acknowledged, in what he thought was an off-the-record interview with Us Weekly, that homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to. It was a straightforward admission, but it was risky at the time. Particularly in the US, the early 1980s were not a friendly time for public personalities who identified as LGBTQ+. It was the height of social conservatism. And many people still viewed homosexuality as taboo. Following the publication of Mathis' comment, there was an immediate and severe backlash. Outraged fans from conservative regions of the nation responded, with some even threatening to kill him. The animosity was so great that Mathis immediately avoided talking about his private life. For his own protection, not out of embarrassment, he completely ceased talking about the subject. Mathis did not allow his career to be derailed by the controversy. He concentrated on his music, something he had always done best. He kept up the beautiful, slick sound that had made him renowned when recording and performing. Other artists may have become activists or retaliated by using their platform, but Mathis took a different route. He let his skill do the talking, thinking that his art, not his personal life, should define him. He refrained from discussing his sexual orientation in public for many years. Then, in 2017, things were different. The world had become more tolerant, and Mathis was at last at ease enough to talk freely once more. He reiterated his remarks from all those years ago in an interview with CBS News. The response was different. There was support rather than criticism. Since society had changed, Mathis could now accept his reality without worrying about losing everything. His admirers had never really deserted him during it all. His voice, his warmth, and his gentle dignity drew many to him, even during the most trying years. As a man who had come out on the other side of a period of discrimination, Mathis unintentionally became a symbol of tenacity within the LGBTQ+ community. Thanks to a duet that swept the music industry, Johnny Mathis made a huge resurgence in the late 1970s. The 1978 song Too Much, Too Little, Too Late, which was recorded with Denise Williams, peaked at #1 on the charts. It was his first US #1 hit since Chances Are in 1957 and peaked at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, Adult Contemporary, and R&B charts. That is a difference of over 20 years. The song was equally successful abroad, peaking at #9 in Canada and #3 in the UK. In addition to being well-liked, it was a commercial force, receiving silver certification in the UK and gold certification in the US. This achievement paved the way for other partnerships with Williams. That's What Friends Are For, a full album of duets they released later that year, won gold in the US and the UK and peaked at #19 on the Billboard album charts. Taking advantage of this momentum, Mathis recorded duets with other iconic performers, such as Gladys Knight, Natalie Cole, and Dionne Warwick. By fusing modern sounds with his distinctive romantic approach, he was able to remain relevant even when disco and rock took over the radio. The secret to his longevity was adaptation. In the 1950s, he began his career as a sweet ballad singer, but as time went on, his music changed to incorporate disco, jazz, soul, soft rock, and even country. Let It Be Me, Mathis in Nashville, 2010, demonstrated his interpretation of country music, whereas his 1979 album Mathis Magic contained disco influences. He was continuously coming up with new methods to engage audiences decades into his career. With his 2017 rendition of the Great New American Songbook, which included versions of contemporary favorites by Adele and Pharrell Williams, Johnny Mathis demonstrated that his voice could infuse any musical era with warmth. Mathis stayed relevant despite the music industry's move to digital channels. He kept celebrating his vast repertoire, reissuing classics, and putting out new music. A new generation was introduced to his work in 2017 when he released The Voice of Romance, the Columbia Original Album Collection, a mammoth 68-disc box set. Popular culture. His songs were used in The X-Files in one of the most memorable ways. The uncanny juxtaposition between his calming voice and the unsettling substance of the 1996 episode Home made a lasting impression. However, Mathis was uneasy by the scene's violence and refused to allow the use of his original recording, so what happened instead? His reputation as a timeless legend was further cemented when his music was featured in Mad Men. There's no denying that Johnny Mathis' appeal has endured for almost 70 years. With over 360 million records sold worldwide, he is one of the best-selling artists of all time because to his warm tenor voice, fluid phrasing, and capacity to emotionally engage listeners. Mathis' influence extended beyond his solo compositions. In honor of his decades of impact, he was granted the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2003. His recordings were regarded as historically and culturally significant in addition to being well-liked. In order to ensure that future generations would hear what made Mathis a legend, the Library of Congress recognized this in 2024 when it added Chances Are to the National Recording Registry. Frank Sinatra, on the other hand, was never one to mince words, and his initial remarks about Johnny Mathis were anything but complimentary. He allegedly referred to Mathis as the African Queen and made the harsh statement, "He sings good, but who wants to listen to that shit," in order to disparage his music. Sinatra's storytelling and elegant wording were the foundation of his approach, whereas Mathis's suave voice tended toward romantic ballads. This strategy seemed too sweet and gentle to Sinatra. However, viewpoints change with time. Mathis gained more respect as his fame increased. In the end, Sinatra acknowledged that Mathis had one of the most unique voices possible, even calling him the master song salesman. Johnny Carson went one step farther and referred to Mathis as the world's greatest ballad singer, echoing Bing Crosby's stance. These were no mere platitudes. These were recognitions from some of the most well-known figures in entertainment, who recognized the importance of long-term success. Mathis never responded to Sinatra's initial comments. Rather, his demeanor was elegant, never criticizing the renowned crooner. His reputation was further enhanced by his quiet dignity. As the voice behind hits like Misty and Chances Are, Mathis sold over 100 million recordings globally over the course of 6 decades, demonstrating that skill and reliability endure even the most critical criticism. Another challenge Mathis faced was critics. His ballads were rejected by jazz purists in the 1950s as being too emotional. They dubbed his music elevator music, a term intended to minimize its creative merit. They believed that jazz was all about technical mastery and improvisation, and Mathis' polished, silky sound was too mainstream. Mathis' rendition didn't even excite Errol Garner, the jazz pianist who wrote Misty. Audiences didn't care, but he felt it was too sophisticated and too pop-oriented. Mathis received his first Grammy nomination for his interpretation of Misty, which became an enormous smash and peaked at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song is now regarded as his hallmark single since it got so closely linked to him over time. Mathis remained unfazed by the comments. Labels and categorizing himself as a specific genre did not interest him. "I didn't care about labels," he once said. "All I wanted to do was sing lovely tunes." He was able to establish a career that went beyond fads in music because to his attitude. Audiences enthusiastically adopted his style, despite reviewers' disagreements about its artistic value. Johnny's Greatest Hits, released in 1958, even invented the idea of the Greatest Hits album. His albums were gold or platinum on a regular basis. Mathis ultimately outlasted the skepticism rather than merely surviving it. His voice became part of pop cultural history, his music persisted, and his impact persisted. The truth had to be acknowledged, even by those who had previously disregarded him. Johnny Mathis was a legend, not merely a singer of ballads.